Hello, my name's Cody Day, and I will be doing my case study on Module 9. Uh, for the first section, it says to summarize the case and establish the facts. The assistant principal, Richard, was a Southside kid himself and is trying to build relationships with some of the students by playing basketball with them. That actually works, and James, the head leader, is actually starting to show up to class and do better. One of the students he was building the relationship with was James, as I'd stated. The troubled student had given a high performing student, David Brass Knuckles, to hold on to. This is a felony offense and is immediate suspension for 45 days in the school. James admits the brass knuckles are his and David was just holding them, and that he had actually threatened to beat David up. Richard does not expel David, but James in the detention facility. Because of this, Richard didn't do his job, or so the administration says, and so he will be reprimanded. So the next section is to report any legal or ethical issues. Technically, he didn't do his job, or how policy states, so Richard had a breach of contract by not suspending one of the students. The officer being called in to the room made it a legal issue instead of an ethical issue. I believe if the officer hadn't been called in, then it would have just been a slap on the wrist, don't do this again, and confiscation of the weapon. However, since he brought the officer in, this made it a legal issue and a felony offense. No one was harmed during the issue, but technically David was harassed by James and was threatened to be beat up, and that's essentially why David kept the brass knuckles, or so James says. What steps should be taken to ensure that others are acting ethically? I think that's a question you have to ask. You have to see what someone's ethics truly are. I believe that policy can sometimes make that very cut and dried, and it's sometimes a gray area, such as this one. And so I think that's something to be considered when making these executive decisions. Next section is to synthesize exactly what happened in a single sentence. Assistant Principal Richard Inman is having an issue with his ethics, deciding whether or not to suspend David, since policy states he should be. However, David was bullied into committing the act, and therefore is where the issue of ethics resides. Let's emphasize the facts. So for people, we have Principal Richard Inman, who was trying to build relationships with troubled students and was playing basketball with them after school. This was becoming successful. Then we have James, the troubled student, who was actually doing better, but has been in and out of trouble. We then had David, the higher performing student, who has never been in trouble and is basically a model student. The teacher that saw the bad behavior and reported them, though she thought it was, or the teacher thought that it was drugs, which is the reason the officer was called. And then you have the officer who made it a legal issue when he was present. So the place is Rocket Junior High, that has nearly 900 students. Seems to be a rough part of town. Seems to be a very dense population. It's near the south side, which is where a lot of the rougher students come from that are more troubled. And then from the program standpoint, you have a public school system. Um, it looks like the principal is trying to build relationships. Um, you also have the age of a troubled student. Uh, James is 15, whereas he's in junior high, so it sounds like he repeated a grade or was at least a late starter. Um, and so those are all demographics to be looking at when considering this issue. To review and prioritize the your information, you have stakeholders, parents that are involved, administration, the students that are involved, as well as the faculty. Um, when you're looking at policy and uh, first time offenders compared to multiple time offenders. Other important information was that I feel was left out was the head principal aware of the situation? Was he even consulted? Were the students and parents informed of policy? The reason I feel like that could have made a decision is because if David knew what was ahead of him, maybe he would have, instead informed teachers that he was being bullied instead of just going along with it. And then there is different punishments for repeat offenders. I feel like a first-time offender bring something like that, especially something that he was coerced into, is a bit harsh, especially considering he's never been in trouble. So, in my mind, there's not enough information to make a very adequate and fair decision. You could make a decision on this, but I feel like it would be a little heavy-handed considering all the information that we need to acquire from this situation. Identify your options and possible consequences. So in my mind, just what I came up with was option 1, to take the reprimand and allow David to stay in school. Your second option is to suspend David and make him pay his consequences with James. And then the only other option I felt was available was to refute the reprimand and take it to the board of executives or the school lawyer and try to get it pulled away and still stay with your decision. In evaluating our options, if you take the reprimand, that means that David's future would be left unaltered. However, the assistant principal could essentially lose his job or, for at the very least, have a black mark on his record. In option 2, Richard will not be reprimanded. A model student's life has been drastically altered by something he was bullied into. David's parents could continue to fight the school board and possibly take the issue to court. And then in option 3, regardless if Richard refutes the reprimand, it is possible that nothing will change. However, he might be able to save himself and still show he did his duties as a principal. Also, David would still be in school. When I imagine implementing my decision, I felt like option 2 would be the best option with what information was available. If you suspend David, you're following through with your job and you're following through with policy. You can then explain to the parents the appeal process, because obviously they're not going to take it on the chin. It sounded like they was pretty upset, so you'd be able to give them the appeal process. And then you could also go on record and make log that what James said about harassing David into taking the brass knuckles, which could definitely help David's case. But at the same time, you're still doing your job, and even though it may not be the most ethical, it's at least keeping you out of harm's way while still trying to help the other student. On ethics and professional norms, I didn't really know where to put these standards, so I decided to just make a separate page for them. On program completers, demonstrate the capacity to evaluate communication about and advocate ethical legal decisions, And program completers understand and demonstrate capacity to model ethical behavior in their personal conduct and relationships to cultivate ethical behaviors in others. And this is my reflection. I just felt like it was a difficult decision to make due to the lack of vital information needed in making the final decision. Factors such as what policy says on first-time offenders and what the head principal might say in the situation, along with the actions of the police officer. We're not even sure if it was legal for him to just take someone's word for it, or if he should have went by what proof was at hand. And this is my presentation. Thank you.